Billy Bob, Space Trucker.
Chapter 17. Emily had tried to catch up with Billy Bob, but she couldn't find him in the mass of people moving through the station. So she returned to the Cultural Dance Center to see if she could warn him before things got started. She saw some Phyllis standing in the crowd, but didn't see the squad she'd noticed earlier. All sorts of species were here, talking and waiting for the event to begin. She looked around, trying to see where the competitors waited between sets, but she only saw a door at the back that was guarded. Cursing softly under her breath, she looked around to try and find an event organizer, spotting a banktier with a data slate and earpiece. "I'm looking for my friend. He said he's competing tonight. Can you show me where to go so I can talk to him?" The banktier just stared at his data slate. "Sorry, dancers can't be disturbed before the program begins. Each set will come out and dance and return to their chambers if they advance to the next round." Emily sighed, and then figured all she could do was wait and hope for the best. She pressed through the crowd to find a table near the edge of the dance floor. Most of the crowd were still standing and talking, so she figured she should get a seat early. After a few minutes, the lights dimmed and brightened as the crowd started to find seats or stand around the area. A banktier wearing some sort of strange black and white suit stepped out to the center of the dance floor. "Esteemed species of all varieties, welcome to tonight's cultural dance tournament. We've got a very impressive selection of dancers tonight, and even one last-minute entry that should prove interesting. For those of you who are attending for the first time, our panel of judges will announce the genre or theme of the song the dance teams must choose, and then in a predetermined order they'll come out and dance. They're ranked according to skill, difficulty, and flair. Those who continue on to the next round return to their preparation room until the next round. Please, I must ask that you refrain from distracting the dancers. This is a very serious tournament after all. Applause and cheers are allowed, however. As usual, this music is taken from a rather interesting and barbaric culture that has more variations of music than we've encountered before some such a young species. Please enjoy yourselves." With that, he walked off the stage as everyone got quiet. She could see the judges sitting on a platform to the side of the dance floor, while everyone who couldn't get a seat stayed close to the edges. Slowly, that strange orb Billy Bob had recognized dropped from the ceiling, spinning around as it began to shine all across the room. There was a murmur of surprise before the music began to play and the announcer came on. "This first number is from a last-minute entry who's never competed before, performing a free choice song. Please give a warm welcome to our first contestant." Billy Bob, Space Trucker Billy Bob, strutted out of the back door and onto the dance floor as the music began. Emily wasn't sure why, but he was wearing a yellow hat that looked rather rigid, and some sort of orange vest over a red shirt. He was wearing those familiar blue jeans, but he also had some sort of belt with strange implements tucked into it. Then the song began. "Young men, there's no need to feel down." He began to stomp, clap, and twist with the song, and overall the crowd began to nod to the beat. But when the song began to chant some sort of chorus, he began to move his arms in time with the music to form symbols that her translator told her matched the start of each letter. The crowd murmured in surprise as he could match up the symbols with the chant so quickly and began to cheer out. The judges nodded at that, scribbling on their data slates. Emily was watching the Phyllis in the crowd, however, but she noticed they were nodding and bobbing with the music more than anyone else. This wasn't an ambush. They were simply here to enjoy the music. She let out a heavy sigh of relief and relaxed in her chair, able to just enjoy the music. It was nothing like the stuff Billy Bob listened to when he was driving, but she figured it was some sort of old ritual song or the sort. The song slowly faded away then as Billy Bob waved and the crowd cheered for the first timer. He saw Emily and grinned, quickly moving over to her table. "Not bad, huh?" "Yes, very good, Billy Bob." They turned then to watch the other dance teams perform their first song. There were no less than 2 Phyllis teams, each with 5 dancers. One team was clearly better, but both were good. Next was a team of 4 Onnets, the insectoids with 4 arms and 4 legs that the banktiers hired as guards. These seemed to be on break. They performed something called the hokey pokey. They looked a bit stiff, but obviously tried their best. Emily was surprised to see a pair of Greslins march out, however, their exosuits decorated in some sort of glowing light display. They normally would never step foot on a black market station, considering their species' strict moral codes. This must be an exception. They started dancing something called the robot, which Billy Bob muttered was cheating. Near the end of their performance, though, one of the exosuits stopped, and there was a hissing and pop as it malfunctioned. The other Greslin tried to finish the dance alone, but the judges were shaking their heads. It was pretty obvious when the judges announced the Greslins were out that they weren't impressed, so they Greslin dragged the malfunctioning suit off the dance floor as Billy Bob nodded and headed back to prepare for the next song. The lights came back up then, and the crowd was already talking. Emily had many of them murmur about how surprised they were that one creature had entered on his own. Could he really expect to perform so many dances as the lead act and keep impressing people? Emily just smiled behind her mask. They'd certainly get to know Billy Bob and his endurance soon enough. Then the lights dimmed and raised to announce the next challenge was about to begin. We will now witness a series of dances using songs that tell historical tales from the culture's past, the judges announced. The music began, and it was heavy with drums and some sort of instruments that Emil hadn't heard before Billy Bob emerged from the door wearing a set of black pants, strange boots, a red shirt, and a giant black fuzzy thing on his head she didn't understand. He didn't walk down to the stage, though. Instead, he moved in an odd way, kicking one leg out ahead of the other while keeping his arms crossed. By the time he got to the dance floor, she couldn't believe how low his body seemed as he kicked out his legs in that strange dance. Then the singing finally began. There lived a certain man in Russia long ago. Emily gasped as Billy Bob began to kick out one leg as he tossed his arms out, or would switch between balancing on the toes of either foot as his kicked his other leg out. The balance he was displaying was unheard of among species she knew, not to mention the strength it had to require to support his body on just his toes while squatting like that. That strange chant in the background as he kicked out, "Rah, rah, Rasputin." The story had to be some sort of legend. There was no way such a person could survive the things the singers said were being done to him. But then again, humans seemed to be very hard to kill. Maybe this was some sort of inspirational song then, about becoming even harder to kill than normal? Finally, the song ended as Billy Bob extended a hand up and kicked both legs out at the same time before bringing them back in and standing up straight. The crowd cheered out, unable to believe what they'd witnessed. Billy Bob was breathing hard, but he was smiling as he stepped over to Emily to watch the other teams. The first Phyllis team came out after him with some sort of song about a crazy lady named Ma Baker. But Billy Bob frowned as he saw their costumes. The Chicago Cubs? That's a baseball team, you fucking idiots. Shaking his head as they performed an acrobatic, very flexible style of dance that the Fleckos were known for. It lacked the sheer strength and endurance of Billy Bob's crazy leg dance, but it was quite good as well. The next Phyllis team came out with strange hats that seemed rather large and stiff, but not like that one Billy Bob had earlier, and strange blotchy pants and vests. The hell are they trying to be? Cowboys? Jesus, Billy Bob muttered as the song began. This here's a story about Billy Joe and Bobby Sue. Emily looked up at Billy Bob. No relation. But it's also the wrong time period for their song. Seriously. Your people seem to have a lot of songs about robbing people. It's sort of a trend. The Phyllis were a little more awkward than the team that came before, but they weren't bad either. After they were finished, the Anits came out, having painted themselves green, but were wearing strange robe-like dresses. She looked at Billy Bob, who shrugged a little. The song began, singing about some sort of terrible creature named Godzilla as Billy Bob slapped his face with his palm. They think Godzilla was Japanese, so they're wearing kimonos. Jesus Christ, shaking his head as he watched. They stomped around, seeming to mimic the creature that was being sung about, but it was impressive as the Phyllis or Billy Bob. Once they were done, the judges conferred and announced the Anits were out. It seemed they'd agreed with Emily's take on the dancing. Now to show these people a real fucking cowboy. Billy Bob muttered and walked to the back as the lights came on. The Anits chittered happily as Emily realized the guards were just thrilled they'd made it to the second round. She giggled a little at the thought they had no idea what they'd dressed up as and just winged it. Human music was very catchy. It made people want to dance. The crowd was talking, and now most the buzz was about Billy Bob, which made Emily smile. She had to agree with the murmurs spreading through the club about how it seemed impossible for him to have done that strange leg dance, but now they knew why he'd entered the dance on his own. The Phyllis could jump around and do acrobatics, but he was able to show extreme balance and endurance all at once. The simplicity of his moves somehow made them more impressive. Soon the lights flickered and everyone quieted down as the judge spoke again. For the next set, the contestants had to do some research. They had to pick a song that was more about rural life, or at least involving work or time after work. The song started, and right away a voice gang out. "Good time." Billy Bob emerged in a strange outfit. Billy Bob's jeans had returned with some strange pointy boots with intricate carvings and a jacket that had strange frills on it. He also had one of the hats the Phyllis had before, but his looked much more suited to his head. When he started to dance, she recognized part of it as that strange dance he'd done to intimidate the Phyllis back on the refueling station. His thumbs tucked into his belt for part of the time as he stomped and shifted to the beat, twisting and pulling his hands out to clap before tucking them back into his belt. Unlike the look of serious concentration from before, he also had a big grin on his face. This song seemed to be singing about good times after a long week of working. So maybe it held special meaning for him, she had no idea. She was impressed with his ability to keep his dance set on a series of mental lines, though, working the same forward and backward, or side to side around the same central position. Like some sort of line dance? Near the end of the song, though, he pulled a hand from his belt to take his hat off, waving it as he danced with more flourishes to end the song on a high note. Once more the crowd cheered as he stepped off to the side, looking a little flushed as he was lightly sweating. So many dances back to back were starting to wear on him, but he looked ready for more. He watched the first Phyllis team then come out onto the dance floor wearing jumpsuits, which made him frown. Then the song started with a lone voice. "I want my own TV." He noticed the back of the jumpsuit said moving service and shrugged a little as Money for Nothing started. But when they began to move like they had before, spinning on the ground and demonstrating their agility, he groaned. Breakdancing to Money for Nothing? That's fucking sacrilege. Even if their costume is closer this time. Emily just glanced at the human, grumbling about his competition. When the next song came on, they were wearing white shirts with black stripes, or black shirts with white stripes, and some sort of mask over their faces, holding bags with a strange curvy symbol on the side with a slash in it. Her translator told her it was a sign for money. "Bank robbers?" Billy Bob muttered when the song began and she heard him snort. "Bank robbers dancing to money." The singing began and they started to move, but the beat was a little too slow for the Phyllis style of dance. It didn't really fit. Then she remembered Billy Bob had her listen to the song before on that record. Pink Side of the Moon? Either way, she didn't think it really fit what they were trying to do. Indeed, once it was over, the judges stood and announced that team was out. Now it was just Billy Bob and the last Phyllis team. They were staring over at him now, sizing up their final opponent. Billy Bob just grinned back at them and walked to the back to prepare. As the lights came on, the Phyllis team who'd just lost was arguing among one another over their loss. Was it the song? Or one of the other dancers? None of them agreed on who had messed it up for the others. Emily just giggled and waited. The crowd was all talking about Billy Bob by now, and she wondered how he'd finish up. Soon the lights flickered and everyone was waiting anxiously. "The last song shall have occult references," said the judge simply before everyone looked to the door. There was the sound of something creaking, and then footsteps. Billy Bob was slowly walking out towards the dance floor. He was wearing some sort of bright red and black jacket with red pants, but his face looked different. Green? As if he was dead? He was dragging a foot as he got out onto the dance floor. And then the song began, and he seemed to jump to life. "It's close to midnight." He started to dance with the song, moving in time to the beat, switching between looking stiff and almost dead to moving with incredible speed and grace. The song was creepy, about some sort of monster or dead thing hunting someone. But his dance seemed to make it seem like he was that creature, albeit as one who could dance. When the song was over, everyone cheered out, and he smiled and moved off to the side with a grin. It was just the last Phyllis team then, and they came out wearing black hoods for some reason, except for one guy in the back wearing what looked like American blue jeans. As the music began, the one Phyllis in the back began to hit a small metal box with a stick. "No? The cowbell?" Billy Bob murmured next to her as she looked over at him. "All our times have come." It seemed to be a strange song about something called the Reaper who collected souls. The Phyllis began a dance that was a bit more human-looking, less acrobatics, and more trying to move with the beat. But the one in the back was just jumping around, smacking that metal bit Billy Bob called a cowbell. Once it was over, the judges were murmuring to each other. Billy Bob was looking up. The Phyllis were looking up. "Dear species, we have a tie on our hands." There were gasps of surprise, and Billy Bob grunted in annoyance. However, our rules dictate a tiebreaker be a duet. Everyone looked to Billy Bob, who then pointed at Emily. I'll use her as my partner. No sweat. Emily blinked in surprise. What? Excellent. You have 10 minutes to prepare. The Phyllis rushed backstage as Billy Bob pulled Emily along with him. Billy Bob, I'm not a dancer like you. That's okay. We'll just do the tango. He had her backstage now and shoved her into his room where his other costumes were strewn out on a table. He began to pull off that red and black thing he had on now, wiping the green makeup off his face. I don't know how to do that. It's okay. Like the great Al Pinocchio once said, there's no mistakes in the tango. You just get tangled up and tango on. He was quickly pulling his regular clothes back on, including his American flag hat. Then he turned back to her. Okay, so just step up to me. He held his arms out a bit as she stepped up. But he was reminded that she was taller than him and his eyes were level with where here collarbone should be, if she has one, but he wasn't sure if she did or not. Shit, I forgot you're taller than me. That's, well, I'll get over it. Just take my hands with yours, your top ones. I don't know what you should do with your lower ones. Just something. Anyway, when I whisper copy, you just do what I'm doing. Keep your feet near mine. I'll take the lead. When I say mirror, you pretend you're my mirror and do what I do, but in the opposite way. Let's try. They tried out for a minute or two as Emily stared mostly at her feet. They moved all right, but she was far from sure about her motions. Inside the room was a buzzer that sounded as he pulled her to the door. Okay, come on then, she gasped out, entirely not ready, but unable to stop him from dragging her back out to the dance floor. He scrolled through his implant till he found a fuego lento. He didn't have much in the way of tango music, but these Zenos had never heard a tango before, so it didn't matter. Once they were on the dance floor, he gripped Emily by one hand and one around her back, only lightly pressing against her wings as he started to dance. She pretty much stared at her feet, trying to move with him, but even when she was a little slow, he had the strength to easily push her leg back, or pull her with him. She wasn't having the easiest of times with it, but so far Billy Bob was capable enough to keep them moving. At times he would whisper for her to mirror or copy, and she tried her best to work with the steps he was going through, moving their legs between and around one another. The slower tempo made her feel like she was doing pretty well, but at the end it picked up with more focus and she had to move quickly. She was getting excited at being in a dance like this. Her life had been all about diplomacy and secrecy, really. She wasn't the kind to be in the spotlight. But here she was, out in the middle of the crowd where everyone was cheering her on. She wasn't flying, but it almost felt like her spirit was, right up until Billy Bob brought her back to reality. I'm going to spin you. Beneath her mask, her eyes went wide as the human pulled on one of her arms and spun her around. The room blurred, and then he tripped her, and as she fell, he caught her with one arm, raising the other as the crowd cheered. They stepped off to the side as Emily tried to get her bearings back, a little stunned still from what Billy Bob had done. It had been exciting and nerve-wracking and stressful, but also fun. She'd have to see if Billy Bob could teach her how to dance sometime, just for fun. For his part, he had been eyeing the massive trophy to the side of the room. He wanted to win so bad he could taste it. He might have to teach Emily how to dance in case this ever happened again. He'd need her to be a bit more confident if he was going to secure his victory with better competitors. Then they watched two Phyllis emerge. One was wearing some sort of giant puffy dress while the other had some strange suit on. The fuck? Billy Bob was muttered as the song began. Well, I'm ever class high society. God's gift to ballroom notoriety. And they started to dance in a strange, somewhat stiff series of steps as Billy Bob's jaw dropped. They're ballroom dancing to big balls? He was in shock, but Emily didn't understand why he seemed so shocked. It was a song singing about some sort of dance meeting called a ball. She didn't get it. Once the song was over, the crowd cheered as well, since the Phyllis had done a decent job of it. The judges stood up then as Billy Bob shook his head. While we feel the dance itself of Billy Bob and Guest was superior. The tie goes to the Phyllis for having costumes in accordance with the rules. What? That's bullshit, Billy Bob was roaring as the Phyllis cheered out. Billy Bob stalked forward as Emily groaned. You didn't say nothing about a tiebreaker. I got costumes for the other sets. The judges stood before the angry human, not seeming worried. The rules state points will be awarded for keeping costumes according to the song set. Your last piece had no costumes. Yeah, but I should have won anyway. Your dances were better, but solo acts also get less. Such crap. "You know what I think of your rules?" he asked as he crossed his arms. The judges just looked up at him, as he then jumped over their table, making them gasp out as he grabbed the large golden trophy behind them. It was massive, with several tiers to it. She forgot how strong he was as he just hoisted it in the air above his head with both hands. "I think I win anyway." "Emily, book it!" He jumped past the crowd as people scattered and en-neat guards chased after him. The diplomat blinked and quickly let her wings flap as she jumped up and began to fly after the human holding the trophy over his head, running and jumping for his ship. And so ends another chapter in the adventure of Billy Bob. Chapter 18, President Cross was in the dodecahedron once more, and with the way things were shaping up, he'd be spending a lot of time in the military command center. This was why they'd built the rest of the dodecahedron under the old Pentagon. From the outside, it looked the same, but now they had a hell of a lot more space underground. The old joke had been that Washington was an iceberg with only a fraction of the city being above ground. Now it was especially true. Besides the dodecahedron, there was the White House 2.0, Basement Congress, the Smithsonian Emergency Patriotic Museum, and the Nixon Presidential Monument. He'd had it constructed in secret back in the 1970s. Every time a president ordered it taken apart, the workers would start dying in very mysterious circumstances, and eventually everyone figured it was easier to just leave Nixon's ghost alone. It had been ages since a president had to worry about a full-scale war. They just dealt with small border skirmishes where they'd send out a carrier group and bomb deep Xeno systems to get them to bugger off. In general, there weren't too many disputes anymore. Humans liked high-gravity planets and did just fine on death worlds. That, and they fought far more ferociously than any other intelligent species. Cross smiled as he thought about the time the Furlan Consortium tried to conquer an outlying mineral-rich system. They'd used their smaller destroyers and cruisers to screen the system, while 2 dreadnoughts and a few support ships were left to seize the orbital factories in the system's asteroid belt. What had happened were the workers, armed with nothing more than welding torches and mining tools, jumped from their asteroids to swarm over the hulls of the ships. The Furlan admiral had sent a panicked message screaming about humans swarming the hull before the bridge was cracked, and he got sucked out into space with his command staff. By the time the screening fleet pulled back to try and deal with the workers, they found that the humans had secured the dreadnought's guns to asteroids as makeshift orbital platforms. The rest of the fleet simply surrendered. The American Navy didn't even have time to respond before the war had started and finished in a day. Most of the time, the best deterrent against Xeno incursion was the average American. They carried guns, lived on shitty planets, and if told that someone wanted to take their shitty land, they'd fight tooth and nail over it. Of course, once Americans had settled a planet enough to make it comfy and pet psychiatrist became a profession, and there were cookie-cutter coffee shops everywhere, they'd pack up and move on to the next shitty planet where they could be rednecks in peace. The first thing any American colonist on a new planet did was create the largest, most ridiculous vehicle to get around comfortably on the planet. Rock buggies, super swamp sliders, masher monster trucks. Cross's favorite were the lava gliders from Texas 2, sometimes referred to as Satan's asshole. Indeed, there was very little overlap between human colonies and Xenos who wanted to steal them. It was mostly about mineral systems and FTL junctions, which was why no one had fought humans on the ground yet. It seemed like that was all going to change, however, as the president listened to the tail end of another intel report. "So these space crabs are really going ahead with this?" The intel officer nodded. "Yes, sir. We continue to intercept fleet orders and transmissions to their commandos to start raiding and capturing humans. Far as we can tell, they're going to try and hold civvies hostage and get that trucker to surrender the diplomat." "Have they even asked us our stance on the whole situation?" "No." President Cross snorted at that. All this time, all the galactic government ever did was tell us to not wipe anyone else out and keep our wars small. Now their secret police assholes are ready to kidnap colonists and hold them hostage because of the actions of one American? Director Ripper gave President Cross the heebie-jeebies, especially since he was in charge of the CIA. He had those super blue eyes that looked dead somehow and always reminded the president of one of those bad guys in movies who would cook up body parts and toss them in a salad. Even so, he was one of the best directors Cross had ever seen, and despite never wanting to go fishing with the guy, the president trusted his judgment. So when he spoke, Cross listened. As you know, human construction crews have been awarded all FTL gate and FTL comm buoy contracts in near space. We haven't had a chance to work on the core systems, but we're confident that everything around us is taken care of. Yeah, so we've got all of their communications, but what's the deal with the gates? Theoretically, we could reverse the flow of the gates and crush everything traveling on the FTL lanes at that moment. But we're really not sure how well that would work out. Plus, it's not specific. We'd crush everything, civilian or military. Cross nodded at that. All right, well, as soon as we confirm reports of the space crab attacks, start bombing the shit out of their core systems. If it's possible to just shut down the FTL gates and strand their fleet, we should try it. If it looks like we'd be hitting a lot of civvy traffic and stranding them as well, then forget it. How bad is this going to be? This is their secret police, after all. Ripper nodded at that. Yes, but that's their folly. They're used to small commando raids against pirates and specific threats. They haven't engaged in wholesale war since their conflict with our new allies. Yeah, speaking of that, weren't they waiting to hear about the success of their diplomat and our space trucker? For the ceremony, yes, but they're forging ahead with the actual mechanics of our new alliance. What are we looking at for blowback? Total war with the rest of the galaxy. The room got quiet as the assembled officers, congresspeople, experts, and of course Governor Dundee stared at the CIA director. It's against the treaty they were forced to sign at the end of the war I mentioned. Forming an alliance with them basically restarts it, and they're not nearly as strong now as they were when that war started. The few allies, they had abandoned them during the fighting, and while they still have a formidable intel service and commandos, they've got virtually no ground troops or navy. Cross rubbed his chin. Will the rest of the galaxy attack the UHG too? That's unclear at this point. We're very explicitly stating this as an alliance between America and the Libertonians, not the UHG, but the space crabs are targeting their colonies already. Yeah, but all American colonies are unofficial. That's the point. We give the UHG the good planets and let them do things by the book. We take the shitholes so no one bothers us. Until we fixed them up enough for the UHG to move in, that is. The space crabs likely don't know we've got people out there. They're just attacking what they know is human. He sighed and shook his head. Try and make it extra clear this is Americans, not normal humans. See if we can spare the rest. Otherwise, mobilize everything. Call up all our reserves. America is going to war. The rest of the room was nodding in agreement. They'd be ready for the official declaration. Sir, one of the admirals spoke up. We've got a carrier group poised to hit the crabs at home. It's tradition for the president to name the first strike operation. President Cross smiled. There was only one option. We're going to call it Operation Billy Bob Space Trucker. Emily groaned as she sat on the crate Billy Bob had set up for her next to the ship. The weight of this planet was intense for her, even though she knew it wasn't even normal for Billy Bob. After escaping with the trophy, they'd taken off and driven through 2 of her sleep cycles before he had pulled out of the FTL lane to land on an uninhabited planet. He wanted to give their new pet a chance to stretch its legs. The problem for her was how heavy the gravity was. She'd insisted on joining him outside in the blue light of the planet's sun. The light gave everything an odd tint, but most of the plains and foliage looked green to her. She was resting on a crate since just breathing was a bit of a strain for her. Billy Bob was tossing that large fake bone in the air, and Stomper, the name he'd chosen for it, would chase it down, pick it up, and run it back. Then it would stomp around in front of him, hence the name, until he wrestled it down and took the toy back before throwing it again. She couldn't believe the confidence he showed with the animal. His body language was perfect for maintaining control over the creature. Was he trained in it? Or was this another strangely innate ability humans seemed to possess? Most species had considerable difficulty domesticating creatures. Maybe it had to do with being omnivores. She was aware they had some sort of species of meat animal that was so docile they could just walk them into a house of slaughter, which, if her translator was correct, was a rather awful name, even if it was descriptive. He'd also informed her that the creature's leavings were rainbow-colored, which gave him no shortage of amusement. He'd insisted she come take a look, but even if the gravity wasn't so intense, she'd have skipped out on the offer. It seemed like Stomper had been happy with the toys and bed they'd bought for him. Well, that she had bought for him upon Billy Bob's begging. She had no idea what they'd do when it was fully grown, however. Then she blinked a little at the thought. She was only supposed to be with Billy Bob for another few standard galactic weeks. That wasn't nearly enough time for Stomper to grow significantly. The diplomat blinked slowly in the heavy gravity as she thought about that. They'd only been traveling for around a standard galactic week, and she was already thinking as if they were going to be traveling together for years, not just weeks. Besides not being sure how Billy Bob felt, she wasn't even all that sure they'd survive more than a few weeks. By now, the Crusticans had to be aware that she had a copy of their suppression device and planned on unveiling it at the council meeting. They hadn't been able to track Billy Bob, it seemed, but that was likely because he was refueling at black market stations now, and slept next to the FTL lanes in deep space instead of any sane species who'd stop in a habited system. They might be set upon by Crustican hunter-killers at any moment. Even if he'd taken out that first squad with surprising ease, they hadn't been expecting resistance. She still couldn't believe how lucky she was to have met him at that moment. Maybe she'd have him take a few detours on their way to the capital. She'd first been worried about making it in time, but with the way he drove, speed wasn't a problem. Her handlers had messaged her through the comm buoys to let her know the Crusticans might be moving against the Americans. She didn't know if she should tell Billy Bob or not. It wasn't like he could stop them from attacking his people. Would he want to know? She was racked with guilt and worry about what she was getting him mixed up in. As she watched him toss the toy to Stomper, she wondered what was going through his head. This is fucking awesome. It's a 6-legged space fox that's going to become as big as a horse, that he could ride. He was excited. And of course, as he played fetch with Stomper, all he could think about was how awesome it would be to ride around a space fox. He still hadn't figured out a satisfying name for the species, but he didn't give a shit about that anymore. He would grab Stomper's tail and wag it around, and then Stomper would stomp around with his tongue hanging out, head in the air. The thing even purred. He had a purring space fox. Fucking awesome. And it shit rainbows. Well, rainbow-colored turds. But that was hilarious. He had to tell Ted, and probably Ivan. And while he was at it, he should tell Paco Taco, too. They'd get the word out. The only problem was he was the only trucker this far into xenospace. He had the deepest 99 of all. He didn't think any humans had even made it this far, let alone all the way into the capital. He was having fun with Stomper, but when he looked over and saw Emily lounging out on the crate, he realized he should pack it up. So he chucked the bone as hard as he could and let Stomper really chase after it before walking over to the back of the ship. When the space fox returned, he smiled and wrestled around with it for a moment before leading it up into the back of his ship. He made sure Stomper had water, and he'd cooked and some of the meat up, mashing it to make sure his new pet didn't have any troubles with it before walking back out and closing the cargo ramp behind him. He walked back up along his ship to Emily, who was trying to push herself up from her lounged position on the crate, but struggling to do that. "This gravity," she gasped out. Billy Bob just smiled and reached down, picking her up off the crate. She was heavier than when they'd tangoed, but he could manage it just fine. He had to be careful to cradle her under her knees and along her upper back, so he didn't put too much pressure on her wings. He didn't mind. After all, she was being a good sport about letting him play with Stomper. Once he was back through the airlock and the gravity returned to standard for her, she didn't leave his hold just yet. "I'm still kind of sore. Mind setting me on the bed?" she asked, and he shrugged, obviously not minding carrying her a little further. She looked up at him, a flood of various emotions washing over her before she leaned up, nuzzling her pointed beak-like muzzle under his beard and giving a nip. What she couldn't see due to his beard was the vein just beneath it. His eyes went wide, and she frowned as she tasted something awfully metallic before red began to pour down his throat. She leaned back in his arms before he gasped, dropping her as he collapsed to his knees, clutching his throat as red began to seep from his fingers. She gasped out, wide-eyed, as she jumped up. "Oh, shit. Oh, merciful deity. What did I do? Billy Bob." He just gurgled a little as he clutched the hole, and she ran around in a panic. "What did I do? How do I fix it?" Mittens was sitting up on the bed, looking between them as the cat wondered what the commotion was about. She remembered the biogel and quickly yanked open the cupboard he'd put the bottles in. She frantically ran back, kneeling next to him while unfastening the top. She was so nervous the purple gel spilled out a bit onto his side as she poured more out, rubbing it on and around the hand he had clutching his throat. Then she poured out more into the cap, which she shoved to his mouth. He opened his lips a bit to try and force the liquid down before his breathing began to return to normal. She sat next to him, looking worried and nervous until he slowly pulled his hand from his throat. His hand had quite a bit of red along it, as did his throat and the top of his shirt. He gasped a little and stayed on his knees for a moment as Emily stared at him wide-eyed. Then he looked over at her. What the fuck? I'm sorry. I'm super really sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen. I had no idea it would. You always seem so tough. It's... He was looking down at his hand for a moment and then back up at her. She could see the confusion in his face. It's how my people show affection. By trying to rip out their karate artery. She frowned at that. Your martial arts artery? No. Fuck. Carotid? Whatever. The thing that guides the blood to my brain. I fucking need that. I'm sorry. My people's anatomy is different? Oh, really? The completely different species has critical life-needing stuff. In other places? Jesus. He rubbed his hand along his throat again and shakily stood up, wobbling a bit before walking into the bathroom. She sat on the floor still, trying to calm down still and remembering to reseal the biogel bottle. She heard him scrubbing his hands with some sort of cleaner. The hell was that about Emily? I take it from your reaction you weren't actually trying to kill me? No, I'm really sorry. It was just, you were carrying me, and I felt comfortable, and I just felt, I don't know, I wanted to show some affection. By ripping my throat out? That's not what I thought would happen. I was caught up in a moment. I'm sorry. You don't seem that distraught. You aren't even crying. He stepped out of the bathroom, rubbing his hands hard with a cleaning gel while she looked up at him, and he noticed the moisture in her eyes and along her cheeks. She just wasn't sobbing like a human might. Shit. Never mind. Fuck, you obviously didn't want it to happen, so apology accepted. It's just stressful trying to hold my blood in so I don't fucking die. He shook his head for a moment as she looked down and away from him. He sighed out and turned back to the bathroom, finally turning on the water to wash off the last of the cleaning gel now that his hands were clean. For my people, that part of the neck is rather leathery under our feathers. We show affection by nipping at it when the other person has it exposed to us. I exposed it to you? Well, you were carrying me in your arms, and I didn't think it through. I'm really sorry, Billy Bob. We had that dance, and... She got quiet as he dried his hands off. Looking over at her for a minute, he didn't seem to know what to do. So he didn't say anything. He walked back out of the ship, picking up the crate he'd set out for her earlier, and stowing it away in the cargo bay, giving Stomper another pet as he walked through. Then he opened the door to his cabin. She had put the biogel away and was sitting in the co-pilot's chair, seeming closed in, trying to take up very little space. He still wasn't totally sure what to say, so he climbed into the pilot's chair, starting up his Longhorn to let it warm up before takeoff. They were quiet as he took them back up into space, heading to the nearest FTL lane to get going again. He finally broke the silence. So that's affection, huh? Billy Bob. Hey, it's okay. I survived. It was just a little cut. I probably overreacted. It was just unexpected. I'm really sorry. I got that. It was just a mistake. A little misunderstanding between two different species. It's okay, since I didn't actually die. She still looked a little worried, and obviously regretful she'd hurt him like that. For his own part, he wasn't sure what sort of affection she was talking about. Like, affection? He saved that question, though, not sure he was ready to tackle it. So, you like that dance, huh? The tango? I didn't think about it too much. I was focused on winning. Were you? It just seemed so intimate. I thought... Well, she trailed off. Maybe you could teach me how to dance sometime? Yeah, that's no problem. I'll need you to get some practice if we hope to really win next time. Your form is a bit sloppy and you stare at your feet way too much. You need to be more aware of your body. She stared at him as he glanced over. Hey, it's the truth. I meant dancing for fun. Fun. Listen, Emily let me tell you what my dad told me just before my first Little League baseball game. It's not about trying your hardest. What matters is if you win. Your father did not tell you that. I'm not kidding. After we lost the game over which I had no real control because I was like, young. We stood out in the parking lot and he pointed to the other kids getting into vehicles with their family. He told me, all these other kids are going to get pizza with their families to either lessen the sting of defeat or make victory all the more sweet. And do you know where we're going, Billy Bob? And I asked if we were going to get pizza, and he said no. We're going home and eating what your mother feels like making with as little prep as possible. And that's just what we did. Emily was staring at Billy Bob open-mouthed with shock. That was your father? Billy Bob nodded. So you know what happened at the next Little League game? I told my team if we lost, I was going to start kicking them in the balls. Even if they had cups on to protect it, it still hurts. And you know what? We won, and my dad told me he was extremely proud of me. So, I kind of have a thing about winning. If I can't win by the rules of the game everyone else is playing, I have to change the rules and win my own game. But you have fun constantly. You're the most insane, fun-loving creature I've ever met. Yeah, 'cause that's the game I play most of the time. That's part of why I became a space trucker. The only real rules I had to follow were delivering shit to the right place at the right time. I kick ass at that, which leaves me free to just have fun doing whatever the fuck I want. But when I'm dancing, that's a competition, and I gotta win. So, if you want me to teach you to dance, I can, and I'll try not to get into my competitive mindset. But no promises. She thought it over for a moment. All right, I'll take whatever teaching you're willing to give. But no more neck biting. No more neck biting. I said I was sorry. I know, and I'm okay, so long as we're clear. Don't try to kill me again. He smiled as she began to realize this was just his behavior. Well, not by biting your neck. Your blood tastes awful. Oh, does it? Well, that's good to know. In case we're ever in a fight, I'll try to bleed into your mouth. I'm sure that's a good strategy. She giggled a little, finally starting to relax a bit now that she realized Billy Bob was really okay. Yeah, try that on a flying predator. I'm sure you'll do well. Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Bird brain. Bird brain? What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Let's get some music going. He turned his music back on as they shifted into the FTL lane flying on towards the capital. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker.